Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and horror. Today, we will unveil Count Strahd Von Zarovich's past and secrets. But first, some warnings to those that only recently heard about the legend of Count Strahd. In this episode, we will dive into Strahd's secrets and history, and there will be spoilers about adventure modules and novels featuring the vampire. Also, if you only know Count Strahd from the recent Curse of Strahd 5th edition adventure, you will notice that there are many differences in the Strahd's history. This adventure was written as a new version of Ravenloft's classic adventure, but it makes some changes to the Kingdom of Barovia and to the history of the Count. We still don't know if a new Ravenloft campaign setting will ever be released, and how this adventure will fit, so most of the secrets revealed here related to the knowledge of the old books of 2nd and 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Are you prepared to meet the Count? Our carriage approaches the gates of Castle Ravenloft. Can you hear the organ music above the thundering storm? Enter the castle of your own free will, and come share the hospitality of Count Strahd. Hour of the Raven. I am the Ancient. I am the land. My beginnings are lost in the darkness of the past. I was the warrior. I was good and just. I thundered across the land like the wrath of a just god. But the war years and the killing years wore down my soul as the wind wears stone into sand. Count Strahd Von Zarovich is the Dark Lord who rules the Kingdom of Barovia. His history is directly tied to the beginning of the Land of the Mist, and he is the first Dark Lord sentenced to be tormented in the Demiplane of Dread. The Vampire Count is directly inspired by the vampire Dracula, and is one of the most iconic villains in the Dungeons and Dragons world. He is a central figure in official adventure modules, novels, and even board games. Since his first appearance on the Ravenloft I6 adventure in 1983, he has always been present through the many editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Count Strahd is a pale, tall, and imposing figure. His manners are noble and sober, but the Count's cold, polished appearance can quickly give way to outbursts of fury. The charismatic Count may be convincing and seductive, but his cordial mask conceals a proud, self-centered, murderous creature. The Count is cunning and cruel, and does not hesitate to use any means within his power to achieve his goals. The recluse ruler of Barovia rarely makes public appearance, but uses a false identity of a Barovian nobleman named Vasily von Holtz to anonymously spy on his subjects. The Count always appears wearing elegant and sober clothes, although anachronistic to the medieval culture of Barovia. Strahd's appearance has changed greatly through the editions of Dungeons and Dragons. In the classic Ravenloft adventure and the Ravenloft campaign setting, his looks emulated the classic Count Dracula from the cinema, alternating between Bela Lugosi's Dracula from the Universal movies and Christopher Lee's version in the Hammer movies. Toward the end of the 3rd edition, in the adventure Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, he was presented with long hair and a different clothing, similar to the vampires of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, such as Louis and Lestat. During the 4th edition era, Strahd was portrayed on the cover of a board game, with a more modern haircut and a stylized design. Finally, for the Curse of Strahd adventure, Strahd's look gained a new characterization, for the first time abandoning his anachronistic Victorian attire to a wardrobe more suited to Barovia's medieval culture, looking a bit like an evil version of Elrond. The Dark Lord is the absolute master of Barovia, being able to close the borders of his domain at any time. When he so wishes, the mist will rise over the borders of Barovia, and anyone wishing to cross the borders will be lost in the mist, only to find himself once again returning to the same place. Count Strahd is a fearsome opponent. Once a general and a warrior, the vampire became a skilled arcane and necromancer. An intelligent and brilliant strategist, Strahd often patiently studies his enemies from a distance, finding the weakness of his rivals, and manipulating the fears and desires of the weaker members of a group. The vampire does not hesitate to flee if he finds himself in a disadvantage, or to use spells and ranged attacks to weaken his enemies from a distance. As an ancestral vampire, he has powers of mental domination and metamorphosis, and can take the form of a wolf, a bat, or even a mist. Strahd has under his control beasts such as rats, bats, wolves, as well as his vampiric spawns, specters, and other undeads and monsters that inhabited Barovia and his castle. Hurting the vampire is extremely difficult. In addition to his invulnerability to normal weapons, his undead body is able to regenerate wounds. Also, Strahd holds in one of his castle towers a huge crystal heart, capable of absorbing the wounds inflicted upon him. Even if defeated, his bodies become a gaseous cloud and return to one of his numerous tombs and refuges in the castle Ravenloft or in other secret locations of Barovia. Perhaps the only way to truly destroy the vampire is through the use of the sacred symbol of Ravenkind. But what do Strahd's many masks hide? What are the secrets of his mysterious past? Strahd was born in the year 299 of the Barovian calendar, the son of Count Strahd Von Zarovich and Countess Ravenloft von Royen. He was the eldest son and heir to the throne of Barovia, the beautiful land of his ancestor, in the idyllic Valinor landscape. Growing up, the young Strahd witnessed the kingdom of Barovia being ravaged by internal strife. In the year 314, a dangerous conflict broke out between the Barovian noble families Dislinsia, Petrovna and Katski, known as the War of the Silver Knives. The conflict began with the mysterious murder of the noble Isabella Dislinsia, the matriarch of a large family of nobles and bankers from the Dovinia region, and resulted in 2 years of open confrontation, murders, and vows of revenge. Count Strahd Von Zarovich succeeded in pacifying the conflict in 316, to the displeasure of the families involved, especially the Dislinsia, who considered their revenge for the death of their matriarch uncompleted. The internal conflict left the kingdom greatly weakened and unprepared for the war that was about to begin. Educated to one day rule Barovia, Strahd grew and emerged as a warrior and military leader, assuming the title of General of Barovian Army in the year 320, when he was only 21 years old. In the same year, Barovia was invaded by the Turk Empire, and even today, this name is not spoken by a Barovian without an accompanying curse. They came from the east and launched a military campaign backed by a fanatical religious devotion to the deity known as Zafar. Led by Durokan the Unstoppable, the Turks quickly conquered Barovia. Unlike previous barbarian invasions, the Turks conquered and settled in the conquered lands, spreading their culture and dogmas of their faith. The Von Zarovich family and other Barovian noble families were humiliated and had to flee to the west. Barovia's fortune changed under the command of General Strahd Von Zarovich, the oldest son of Count Strahd. The young warrior began a campaign to reclaim the land and honor of his family, and proved to be a brave, charismatic warrior and a military genius. After 26 years of battle, the fate of the Von Zarovich seems sealed, when the Turks achieved a great victory and murdered Count Barov and his wife Ravenloft. The battle for the control of Barovia was at a critical moment. Count Strahd was devastated by the tragedy of his parents' deaths and exhausted by the long years of military campaigning. Strahd's forces were cornered by the Turks in some ancient ruins on the Balinox, and defeat was imminent. In these ruins, Strahd found a book with powerful infernal invocations. In the face of imminent defeat, Strahd decided to appeal to these demonic forces. Using a macabre ritual, Strahd summoned Inahira, an Arcanoloth, an infernal being inhabitant of the plane of Gehenna. Strahd sealed an infernal pact with Inahira. The fiend would grant Strahd victory over the Turks, so that the long war would finally be over. In return, Inahira would have possession of Strahd's soul when he died. Strahd accepted the infernal pact, but imposed one condition. He would keep in his possession the Book of Keeping, that served as Inahira's phylactery, where the fiend recorded all the soul's contracts owed to him. The proud fiend never thought that a mortal warrior would offer any danger to him, and agreed to the terms of the bargain. In the decisive battle for Barovia, as promised by the fiend Inahira, Strahd led his forces to victory, managing to reverse the course of the war and defeat the Turk army. In that same year, the last of the Turks were expelled from Barovia, and Count Strahd took back the lands of his ancestors. After consolidating his victory, Strahd began the construction of a great castle, designed to be the seat of power of the Zarovich family. The construction was carried out on the top of a mountain, near the village of Barovia, in an impregnable place of rare beauty. The construction was completed in 349, and Count Strahd named the castle Ravenloft, in honor of his dead mother, Countess Ravenloft von Royen. The bodies of his deceased parents were brought to the castle to rest within their crypts, and Strahd finally summoned Barovia's former noble families to return to their homeland. Victory, however, did not bring him peace of mind. After a life of conflict and violence, the government of Barovia felt empty and fruitless. He was now a middle-aged man, facing the first signs of decay of his physical might. Age and death reserved an even more cruel fate to him, due to the sacrifice of his soul to the fiend Inahira that hovered upon his shoulders. Under the weight of this supernatural threat, Count Strahd began to search and study scrolls and tomes of magic, hoping to find a way to reverse his destiny. Not everyone was satisfied with Strahd's sacrifices and his glory as ruler and hero of Barovia. In the year 350, an assassination attempt occurred against Strahd, when the Balverzi sect of assassins tried and failed to eliminate the ruler of Barovia. Strahd took from the assassin the legendary murderous dagger of his secret order, whose leather was made with the skin of his first victim. The masterminds of the assassination attempt were still unknown, but Strahd suspected it was one of the ungrateful noble families of his king. In that same year, his younger brother, Sergei von Zarovich, arrived at Castle Ravenloft. The 26-year-old youth was preparing to become a cleric of the Andral Church. His joviality and innocence, and his insistence to keep contact with the peasants of the village of Barovia, infuriated the Count, and reminded Strahd of all that he had sacrificed through 26 years of war for his homeland. The fraternal relationship would deteriorate even further when Sergei decided to abandon his clerical career to announce his marriage to a beautiful young woman he had fallen in love with, a poor Barovian peasant named Tatiana. When Strahd finally gave in to Sergei's requests and agreed to meet the young Tatiana, he too fell madly in love with the beautiful peasant, and his heart was filled with desire, envy, and suffering. Tatiana aroused his deepest yearnings, but as he tried to approach the young woman, Strahd realized that the young girl saw him as a father figure, and affectionately called him Old One. The couple asked Count Strahd's blessing for their marriage, which he graciously granted. The wedding was scheduled, and the entire nobility of Barovia was invited to Castle Ravenloft. As the wedding approached, Strahd's despair grew, and he turned again to his books and tomes of dark magic, his new obsession. On the wedding day, he found in an ancient tome a spell that promised to grant the deepest desire of his heart. He conjured the spell and entered in contact with a strange and dark entity, who Strahd referred as Death itself. The entity promised to Strahd to ward off the aging and death, in exchange for the grisly murder of his younger brother Sergei. Strahd's conversation with the dark entity was accidentally overheard by his friend and captain, Alec Gwyn. Count Strahd, knowing that his former ally could reveal his intentions, was forced to confront Alec to keep his secret. In the clash, both warriors were mortally wounded, but listening to the whispers of the dark entity, Strahd drank the blood of his former ally to escape his death. After committing this unholy act, he found himself recovered from his injuries and went to his brother's quarters, where Sergei was preparing for the marriage. Sergei received Strahd with the anxiety and happiness of a bridegroom about to marry, and Strahd presented his brother with the Barovia dagger with which they tried to kill him. As the frightened young man tried to understand the meaning of the macabre gift, Strahd dug the dagger into the young man's heart. As he bled to death, Strahd lifted his lips to the wound and drank the blood pouring from his heart, and was then turned into a vampire. As promised by the dark entity, he was now immortal, immune to the effects of aging, and with Sergei out of the way, he would have Tatiana only for himself. Meanwhile, while the wedding guests were waiting for the ceremony, a trap was being set by Strahd's opponents. Leodis Lincia, the patriarch of the noble rival family, had presented a false excuse for his absence on the wedding and hired assassins that planned to brutally murder the Zarovichs. The delay of the fiancé Sergei aroused suspicion, and soon his body and that of the former captain Alec were discovered. In the ensuing chaos, assassins were suspected of being present at the castle, and the gates of the castle were closed. The sad news shook the bride Tatiana, and Strahd came to her comfort on the parapet located at the back of the chapel. Seeing Strahd, Tatiana wept on his shoulder for Sergei's death. Longing for the beautiful Tatiana, Strahd let himself be carried away by his emotion and desire, and declared his love for Tatiana, kissing her. His cold death touch and his morbid lust for the grieving bride of his younger brother made Tatiana realize the monstrosity he had become. In pain and despair, she fled Strahd. The vampire chased her briefly, but in horror, she launched herself from the castle parapet into a mist-shrouded abyss, where her body would never be found. The mist suddenly rose to envelop the castle, while Strahd mourned Tatiana's suicide. At this time, he was attacked by the killers sent by Leo de Silencia. The bolts of the crossbows pierced his body, but were unable to kill him. In murderous fury, Strahd discounted his frustrations not only on the assassins, but on all the wedding guests, butchering everyone present. The mists have finally engulfed the lands of Barovia, and Strahd was now the absolute lord of his domain, eternally trapped within its borders. Count Strahd mornings turning into murderous fury, and he began a hunt for the de Silencia family. Taking advantage of the vacuum left by the death of most Barovian nobles in the bloody marriage, Strahd took absolute and authoritarian control of the kingdom. For the people of Barovia, the tragedy of the wedding was imputed as a result of the betrayal of the de Silencia family, who had massacred the entire nobility and murdered even Count Strahd himself. The real Count Strahd assumed the identity of his middle brother Sturm, was out of Barovia and could not attend at the wedding at the time. Since this moment, he assumed from time to time a false identity of an heir to the throne, who, upon reaching his coronation, by tradition assumed the name of the late Count Strahd Von Zarovich. Strahd consolidated his power in Barovia and pursued Leo de Silencia for years, while the old noble enemy, having discovered the true nature of his rival, was preparing to one day face the vampiric lord. In 398, they finally confronted each other. Count Strahd discovered him in hiding in the monastery of the Silver Threads, but his rival had prepared a trap. He lured Strahd into a room protected by divine symbols, so the vampire could not escape. Leo's plan might have worked, but Strahd was aided by the monks, previously dominated by his power. Strahd decided to punish his rival by turning him into a vampire and imprisoning him in a stone tomb in the monastery. To this day, Leo de Silencia alternates between torpor and failed attempts to escape his prison, in madness and eternal thirst for blood. In the year 400, Strahd found the first reincarnation of Tatiana in his domains. Strahd thought a new chance was emerging to conquer his loved one, but she was murdered before he could complete his approach and transform her into his immortal beloved. About 50 years later, another incarnation of Tatiana appears in the realm, only to die of an intense fever shortly after being met by Count Strahd. In the year 470, the Vistani first entered the land of the mists. Madame Eva, the leader of this nomadic and mysterious people, struck a deal with Count Strahd. The Vistani were from now on protected in the land of Barovia, but would act as eyes and ears to the vampire count. In 475, the elf vampire Yonder Sunstar is swallowed by the mists and appears in the domain of Barovia. Strahd and Yonder form a tenuous alliance, and the kind elven vampire, an older vampire than Strahd, teaches the Count about his vampiric nature, while Strahd grants him access to his library and resources to research his goals. Strahd and Yonder's tenuous relationships deteriorates over the years, until in 499 they clash, and Yonder, using the Roly symbol of Ravenkind, almost managed to destroy both him and Strahd, and forces the vampire count to a few years in torpor. In 528, a group of adventurers were engulfed by the mists, and decided to invade and confront Strahd in his castle. The adventurers failed in their attempt, and were destroyed by the Count. In the year 542, the mighty lich Azalin was swallowed by the mists and emerged in Barovia, where he found himself unable to escape this plane of existence and to learn any new spells. Count Strahd and Azalin formed a reluctant alliance, in which Azalin would teach him arcane secrets, and the Vampire Lord would assist him in his plan to try to break through the barriers of the mists and return to the world of Oerth. In 547, the mists unveiled for the first time and revealed the domain of Forlorn. Strahd discovered that he was limited to the frontier of his kingdom, and sent Azalin to investigate these new lands. The Lich reported nothing of relevance, finding only haunted ruins and wild humanoids. The alliance between Strahd and Azalin finally bears fruit, and together they build a machine called Apparatus, capable of separating souls and personalities. The experiment is successful, and they separate the essence of Strahd, and together they were able to escape the lands of the mists and emerge in the realm of Mordant. Strahd's personality was divided between a kind alchemist and the essence of the vampire beast. A group of local adventurers intervenes in the plans of Azalin and Strahd, and as a result, Mordant lands are also swallowed into the Misty Plan, and Strahd and Azalin returned to Barovia. After their failed attempt to escape, Azalin and Strahd break their alliance, and Azalin advances into the mists, claiming for himself a kingdom to rule. The dark powers respond to the Lich's plea, and the mist recedes to reveal the kingdom of Darkon, where King Azalin Rex is now the new ruler. The former allies were then deadly enemies, and Azalin began preparations to invade Barovia. The war between the kingdoms is short-lived, as Strahd manages to infiltrate Kargat, Azalin's secret police, and break the chain of command. Azalin himself realized the futility of the conquest of Barovia, and the war is abruptly over, although Strahd and Azalin remain rivals and enemies to this day. In the following years, the mists brought to the Plane of Dread several kingdoms and their respective evil Dark Lords. Strahd had a brief encounter and confrontation with Lord Soth, who also appeared first in Barovia before also claiming the domain of Sithkus among the mists. Strahd and Azalin would once again clash, directly at the event known as the Great Conjunction. The prophecies of the Ducar Vistani Iskoza foresaw 6 signs that would precede the end of the Lands of the Mists. Azalin manipulated events to accelerate the signs of the Grand Conjunction, and eventually anticipates the last sign of the prophecy before the right time. For a brief period, the Mists released their prisoners, and Strahd and Azalin returned to the material plane, where Barovia was once located. Azalin tried to consolidate the last signs of the prophecy, and helped the Inahira fiend to finally obtain Strahd's soul. Strahd once again found a new incarnation of Tatiana, and decided to conquer his immortal beloved. Thanks to the intervention of a group of adventurers, Inahira's Book of Keeping was destroyed by the holy symbol of Ravenkind. The last sign of the prophecy was not fulfilled, and the end of the Demiplane of Dread was avoided. Strahd, Azalin, and the fiend Inahira were swallowed up as prisoners of the mists. The core of the realms were greatly changed after the Great Upheaval, and entire kingdoms disappeared from the map, giving way to a large canyon known as the Shadow Rift. Taking advantage of Gundarak's internal crisis after the mysterious death of his Dark Lord Duke Gundar, Strahd launched a military campaign against the kingdom. The invasion was successful, and after a few months, most of the Gundarak realm was under Barovian rule, and the Mists recognized Lord Strahd's conquest over these lands, expanding the boundaries of his dominion. Today, the vampire continues to pursue his deepest longing, the reincarnation of his beloved Tatiana. Tara Koriana, her current incarnation, was taken in her childhood to the kingdom of Hazlan to be away from the influence of the vampire count. The young woman is a priest of the Church of Ezra and has dedicated her life to fight the forces of evil in the lands of the mists. The designs of the dark powers are cruel, and they certainly would keep tormenting the infamous Count Strahd with fierce obsession. The master of Castle Ravenloft does not appreciate these inopportune questions about his past, and his red eyes reveal his bloodlust after running and battling through the corridors of this haunted castle. You can still hear the dark laughter of your pale host. When sunlight rises over the Balinox, you breathe a sigh of relief as you encounter Avistani Vardo in the inner courtyard of the castle. With no other means of escaping, we can only beg to these mysterious people to carry us through the mists, away from this cursed castle. The time has come to leave Barovia and get far away from the cursed Strahd Zarovich and his children of the night. Still interested in exploring other realms and secrets of the demiplane of dread? If so, please subscribe to this channel and let us travel through the mists with the enigmatic Vistani as we explore the secrets of this tormented world.